That was the moment everything flipped. I was loading hay into the barn, minding my own business, when I saw two men in matching polo shirts push open my front gate like it belonged to them. They didn't pause. They didn't look around for me. They just strolled in with clipboards tucked under their arms, sunglasses on, and that stiff, self-important posture people get when they think a title makes them powerful. For a second, I honestly thought they were salesmen who got lost, but the way they walked around told me otherwise. They weren't confused. They weren't asking for directions. They were scanning my property like they were checking items off a list. One of them even bent down to look at the grass near the driveway, as if he had some kind of inspection training. I stepped out of the barn and called out to them, but they didn't even acknowledge me. They just kept on walking toward my tool shed like they had a right to be there. And that's when my patience hit its limit. I'd lived on this farm long before any shiny new houses went up down the road. Back then it was all open land, quiet mornings, and neighbors who respected boundaries. Now, suddenly, some community association popped up and started acting like they ran the whole area. My land wasn't part of their neighborhood. I had never signed any forms, never agreed to any rules, never attended any meetings. So seeing strangers wander around like inspectors made my blood boil. It felt like someone walking into your bedroom and opening drawers without asking. I walked right up to them and asked what they were doing. One of the men finally turned, pointed toward my barn with his pen, and said they were here to assess violations. He said it in a tone that suggested I already knew what he meant, which only annoyed me more. I asked straight out, "What HOA are you even talking about?" The other man adjusted his sunglasses and replied like he was reading from a script. He said the new development 2 miles away had decided to include surrounding rural properties in their extended compliance plan. It was one of the most ridiculous things I had ever heard. They voted among themselves, and surprise, they decided they were now my rule makers too. I had no part in it, no notice, no choice. They acted like I should feel honored that they wanted to bring my property up to standard. Meanwhile, my farm had been running just fine for decades, without any help from clipboard warriors. My patience dropped to zero. These weren't officials. They weren't law enforcement. They were two guys with matching shirts pretending their neighborhood rules extended past their own street. And the fact that they thought they could march onto my land without permission told me exactly what kind of trouble they planned to bring.
They walked onto my land like they owned it. That was the moment everything flipped. I was in the middle of loading hay into the barn, sweat on my neck, mind in my own world, when I noticed the front gate swing open. 2 men in matching polo shirts stepped in like they were walking into a property they already controlled. No pause, no announcement, no respect for the fact that they were trespassing. They didn't knock on the door or call out to see if anyone was home. They didn't even hesitate at the fence line. They just marched straight onto my land with clipboards under their arms, sunglasses hiding their eyes, and that stiff kind of posture you see in people who think authority gives them automatic power. For a moment, I honestly wondered if they were delivery guys or contractors looking for an address. But the way they moved told me everything. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They were inspecting. Their heads tilted from side to side, like they were making mental notes about every inch of my property. One of them even leaned forward to look at my barn window, as if he already had a list of things to critique. That's when my patience started slipping. I had lived on this farm for years before any fancy development went up down the road. Back then, it was quiet, open land. Real neighbors respected each other's boundaries. Nobody ever walked onto your property unless they were invited or needed help. Then the new houses came in, clean sidewalks, shiny mailboxes, and people who believed their neighborhood rules applied to everyone in a 5-mile radius. My land was not, and had never been, part of their community. I had no agreement with them, no contract, no shared services. Nothing tied me to their HOA. So seeing 2 strangers strolling around like inspectors felt like someone picking up your phone and scrolling through your messages without asking. It was personal. I walked out of the barn and asked them what they were doing. One of the men finally turned toward me, pointed at my barn with the tip of his pen, and said they were here to assess violations. He said it like he was delivering a routine announcement, as if I should already know why they were there. I asked what HOA they thought they represented. I wanted to hear it from their own mouths. The second guy pushed his sunglasses up and said the development 2 miles away had recently decided to bring surrounding rural properties into their extended compliance plan. In simple words, they had voted among themselves and decided their neighborhood rules now applied to me. They never asked me. They never notified me. They just assumed they could expand their power like drawing a bigger circle on a map. That was the last straw. They thought a neighborhood association gave them authority over land that didn't belong to them. They thought I'd roll over and accept it because they had clipboards and matching shirts.
They returned, and this time they brought back up 12 days later. I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Their truck rolled up again, slow and dramatic, like they wanted me to know they were back for round 2. But this time, they weren't just a pair of clipboard cowboys. They brought a third man, and he stepped out wearing a black vest with big printed letters that said, HOA Enforcement. It would have been funny if it wasn't so ridiculous. He looked like someone who ordered the vest online and couldn't wait to pretend he had authority. No badge, no ID, nothing official about him except the confidence of someone who watched too many police shows. They didn't knock. They didn't call out. They walked straight toward my fence again, as if my property line was just a suggestion. One of the original 2 guys pulled out a measuring tape and stretched it across the fence post like he was calculating evidence. The other one pointed at my tractor and whispered something to the vest guy. From a distance, they looked like they discovered a crime scene, instead of a piece of farming equipment parked exactly where it should be. Diesel, my dog, trotted beside me as I walked out to meet them. Diesel isn't aggressive, but he's big enough to make anyone think twice about causing trouble. I called out and asked if they were really trying this again. The vest guy turned toward me like he'd been waiting for his cue. He straightened his shoulders and started talking in a serious tone. He said they were documenting multiple violations and claimed my animals needed to be relocated to an approved facility. I couldn't hold it in. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the whole situation was so unbelievable. These were 3 men who had no legal authority, standing on my land, trying to act like they controlled agriculture, animals, and rural life. These animals have been here longer than your entire HOA exists, I told him. The vest guy's expression shifted quick. He didn't like being challenged. People who rely on fake authority rarely do. He tightened his jaw and said they would continue inspections weekly, like they were placing me on some kind of schedule. That's when I stepped forward and gave them a clear warning. No shouting, no threats, just a simple line they couldn't misinterpret. Step on my land again, and it will be the last time you do. Something in my tone must have clicked for them. They exchanged uncertain looks, shuffled their clipboards, and headed back to their truck. They didn't argue. They didn't try to prove a point. They just left. But I knew this wasn't over. People who want control rarely quit after one setback. That night, I sat on my porch thinking about the next move. If they believed they could walk onto my farm whenever they wanted, I needed to make sure the land itself told them otherwise. And electricity helps with that. The electric fence plant next morning. I woke up with a plan already forming in my mind. If those HOA men wanted to act like my land was their playground, then I needed a way to show them, without a single conversation, that the line between their world and mine wasn't open for negotiation. So I spent the early hours installing electric fencing along the entire property line that faced the road and the gate. They kept walking through. This wasn't the kind of high-voltage setup people imagine from movies. It was a simple, low-power electric fence just strong enough to snap someone to attention and remind them they crossed into a place they had no right to enter. I made sure it met every local regulation, because unlike them, I follow real laws. After the wiring was set, I put up signs. Not small ones you could pretend you didn't see. These were huge, bright warnings that you could spot from the road without squinting. Electric fence, private property, no trespassing, all written in bold letters. There was no way anyone could claim they accidentally slipped past the boundary. To finish it off, I installed a camera facing the entrance directly. If they were bold enough to try anything again, I wanted evidence. Clear video, clear audio, everything recorded. Diesel sat next to me the whole time watching. He knew something big was happening. And of course, when you prepare for trouble, the universe never disappoints. Not even 2 days later, heard shouting outside. Real shouting, not the, hey, hello, kind, but the angry, panicked kind. I stepped out of the barn and walked toward the gate. There they were, 2 of the same HOA guys from before, standing near the fence and holding their hands like they just touched a hot stove. They were cursing, pacing, shaking their arms out, complaining to each other. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. They tried to crawl through the fence line despite the giant warning signs practically screaming at them. And the fence did exactly what it was designed to do. It didn't hurt them. It just reminded them that ignoring boundaries comes with consequences. Seconds later, the familiar car of the vest guy rolled up. He stepped out looking furious, like he'd been personally insulted. He ran straight toward the 2 men, then turned and started yelling in my direction. He shouted that my fence was illegal, dangerous, and my favorite part, a threat to HOA officials. I walked toward him calmly and told him the truth. On private land, trespassing is what's dangerous, not fences. He didn't like that. His face twisted up, and he started threatening to call the sheriff, as if that would intimidate me. I shrugged and said, please do, because unlike them, had nothing to hide. I had signs. I had cameras. I had the law on my side. And they had nothing but bruised egos and tingling fingertips.
The sheriff arrives. And finally, reality hits them. The sheriff pulled up about 15 minutes later, just swirling behind his cruiser as he parked near the gate. He stepped out with a calm, steady posture, the kind of presence that instantly settles a chaotic situation. I walked over to meet him, phone in hand, ready with everything he needed to see. I showed him the videos first. Clear footage of the HOA men stepping past the signs, poking around my property and acting like they had real authority. Then I showed him the giant warning signs I posted along the fence line, each one bright enough to be visible from the road. Finally, I played the recordings where they talked about weekly inspections and claimed they could relocate my animals. The sheriff watched everything without interrupting, nodding slowly as the pieces fell into place. Then he turned toward the HOA trio. His tone wasn't angry, but it carried weight. You guys know this isn't your jurisdiction, right? The vest guy opened his binder like he was about to present evidence in court. He flipped through pages, pulled out a few printouts and started waving them as if the sheriff just needed to read the right line to understand their imaginary authority. The other 2 men nodded behind him like backup dancers. None of it mattered. The sheriff took a breath and explained it slowly, almost gently, like he was talking to people who needed things spelled out clearly. He said, my farm was well outside their HOA boundaries. They had zero legal right to step on my property. The electric fence was legal, clearly marked and completely allowed. Any future visits without permission would count as harassment and trespassing. With every point, the HOA men deflated a little more. You could see their confidence drain. They stood there staring at the sheriff like someone unplugged their brains and left them buffering. Their fake authority wasn't just challenged, it was demolished by actual law. But they still tried one last weak attempt to save face. He's being uncooperative, one of them muttered. The sheriff turned to him with a look that said he'd heard enough nonsense for one day. He doesn't have to cooperate with something you don't have authority to do. That shut everything down. No more arguing. No more papers. No more pretending. The 3 men quietly closed their binder, shuffled to their truck, and left without another word. No dramatic exit. No final threats. Just silence and the sound of their tires rolling away. And that was it. From that day forward, my farm returned to being what it always was, peaceful, quiet, and mine. No clipboards, no fake officials, no made-up rules. Just my land, my animals, and a fence that did exactly what it was supposed to do, keep the wrong people out. Sometimes you don't need a fight. You don't need shouting or drama. You just need a clear boundary and a little electricity to remind people that it exists.